Okay, Socrates. Now we're getting to somebody you've heard of. I know you've all heard of Socrates, right? All right. Okay, Socrates, interesting individual. He once wrote, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Yeah, you need to know that. He said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Okay. He was born in a middle-class family in the city of Attica. He was an infantryman in the Peloponnesian War, recognized for his courage. So this isn't a guy that sat around his bed philosophizing all the time. This is a guy that went out and did something. Okay? He wasn't afraid to go into battle. He was a good soldier, recognized for his courage. The only thing that he really knew was that he knew nothing. The only thing that he really knew was that he knew nothing. Now, what we know of Socrates is from Plato's writings, how Plato portrays him. So, you know, it's difficult to really get at Socrates' mind and really understand how he actually, you're getting it secondhand mostly from Plato. So we just kind of have to take it at face value at some point, that this is the character of Socrates, what he was like. He was this kind of guy. He was put on trial for corrupting the youth and for questioning the gods, i.e. impiety. Once again, religious folks sometimes don't like new ideas on the block. Okay, and I'm just picking on that because that's what happened here. He was persecuted for his beliefs. All right, and the powers that were at that time didn't like it. What's that?
Didn't he drink the poison in jail because
he drank poison hemlock?
Right.
Yeah.
Because he would rather die than...
He preferred die to be in exile. Yeah. He didn't want to be kicked out of his home country. Once again, he made that choice. But being true to yourself is the most important thing a man can do, he believed. And obviously he died for his own beliefs. So he was true to himself, wasn't he? He believed enough to die for it. Now, we can question whether he believed, and certainly his own follower, or well, not his, Plato was his follower, but you know, next generation, Aristotle afterwards, certainly does question what he believed. Challenges, looks at things a little differently. But you can't help but respect the guy. He fought in a war and recognized for his courage. And he came out of a middle-class family. He wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth, and yet he's become among the most famous philosophers in history. And yet didn't write anything about himself. You know, oftentimes the greatest men don't write about themselves. They're written about, right? That's kind of how that works out sometimes. But an interesting figure, and certainly has some new ideas to bring to the realm of philosophy. Okay, I want you to know what kind of a snapshot of Socrates' version of wisdom. So you'll see this on an exam, most likely. All right. For one thing, it's the awareness of your own ignorance. The awareness of your own ignorance. He hammers that over and over in his writings, that he doesn't claim to have all the answers. Okay? Now, you pick up from that he does know something, but he doesn't admit to knowing anything. He just says, hey, I'm not sure, but the problem with you is, I mean, if I can paraphrase what he's getting at, Socrates is saying, I realize I don't know anything, but your problem is that you think you do and you don't. And that's really what he's getting at, is that you think you've got all this figured out, and the reality is you're just as ignorant as anybody else, and you know, the danger is that you don't know it. You know, that's really what he's getting at a lot of times. Okay, so the awareness of your own ignorance is, that's wisdom, all right, for him. Okay, he contrasts unethical characterizations of knowledge of the self-serving sophists. Again, he was not the dirty lawyer. Okay, he didn't like that at all. He didn't like to win an argument for the argument's sake. It was for a greater cause, to learn, to understand. All right, he connects his lack of knowledge and subsequent search for it to virtue. The most important virtue was excellence, arete. Okay, excellence. All right, knowledge, and that was really big in the Greek world. You have to understand, when we're talking about virtues, that was everything revolved around virtue, being a virtuous person. However you want to define that, and they had certain virtues that were there. You know, you've probably heard the phrase, patience is a virtue, right? But being a virtuous person, we might call it a good person, but it was more defined for them. All right, knowledge is innate, and by questioning in a method called the Socratic dialogue, or also referred to as Socratic method. There's both terms used, okay? Socratic dialogue or Socratic method. He separates knowledge from true belief because truth requires a justification for the belief. All right? Truth requires a justification for the belief. Now, we talked about truth early in the semester. We've already talked about true belief and justification and this kind of stuff. He is saying that you have innate ideas. Now, if you have innate ideas, what kind of knowledge really becomes empirical or rational? Which would have more weight? If you have built-in ideas, they're built in.
Then
You're
it's
born
not
with
the
it.
five senses one.
It's what?
It's not the five senses.
Not the five senses one. That would be okay. All right. That's all right. At least you get the concept. Okay. That would be empiricism. So he's leaning more toward the rationalist kind of thinking, right? So we see that rift with him and Aristotle. I think we see Socrates and Plato much more on the rationalist camp, and Aristotle's much more in the empirical camp. All right. So Socrates, he says, you've already got it in you, and of course there's a story he's going along showing an example of a guy sits down doing working on a geometry problem basically, and the guy starts figuring it out for himself, even though he's never been taught that. When you're sitting down, the light bulb comes on sometimes, right? When you're doing math and stuff like that. Oh, I see how. And nobody had to tell you how to do it. Well, that's what he's saying. He's using that as an example. That little light bulb coming on is, see, it was already in you. You figured it out. I didn't tell you. Your teacher didn't tell you. You figured this out all on your own because it was already there. And that's the concept that Socrates has. He believed in the forms, in the doctrine of the forms that we talked about, that this sort of more like a realm of ideas that is more real than the reality that we perceive. Okay, so that's his idea of wisdom.